Consumed by the darkness, I take a hit of my last cigarette, embrace its slow burn as it makes its way through my lungs. The ember's warmth on my cold hands reminded me of what it's like to feel once more. It's hard to tell what's real and what's not when you spend so much time in your head, lost in thought like a pendulum swinging to the beat of life's chaotic melody. I try to ground myself in the things that once brought me so much joy, the never-ending, inescapable torture that is my very own thoughts, festering like a blistered wound incapable of healing. The past a severed artery, bleeding me dry, and in present with these moments, I feel so alive. For heaven's gaze upon me as I look in the sky. Born with a purpose, just ask yourself, why? You feel as if you're hopeless, like nothing will ever feel better than the years you've already lost. Time's ticking, and with each breath you're inching closer to the end. But why were you given this breath? Let's take a moment to reflect. What are your worst fears? Your dreams, your favorite things in life? What is it that brings you peace? And what is it that drives you mad? These very traits that define us as individuals can also be the reasons for our suffering. Wearing our trauma like a scar, a sickness that changes us through time. We build walls to prevent further pain, but when it all comes crashing down, we're left to die alone. But what if I told you there could be purpose in your suffering, an understanding that would never be found otherwise? I'm here to guide you through the many instances of pain that we deal with in our lives, in hopes of bringing some clarity to a hopeless mindset. So hold tight and don't slip. Your pain is a gift. Throughout my 29 years in life, I found myself at some euphoric peaks and painstaking lows. Many troubles and dysfunctions followed me throughout early adulthood, giving me insufferable anxiety about how well my future may pan out. I was going through a deep depression, a period that caused my life to be put on hold for multiple years. I cut all of my loved ones off, became highly reclusive, and decided to continue my life inside of a virtual world rather than facing the darkness my reality had become. I would spend most of my days droning through work on less than 4 hours of sleep a night, my only source of energy being large doses of caffeine, constant hits of nicotine to keep me feeling somewhat stable throughout my day. I would get home, and with only a large cup of coffee and some cigarette smoke in my aching stomach, I would figure it was time I finally eat something. I was typically in a huge rush, ordering or reheating whatever processed junk I could quickly shove down my throat in order to subside my hunger. I was in such a hurry because I couldn't wait to run to my room, lock the door behind me, and finally unplug my brain from the conscious state I was forced to endure. I couldn't stand the state of the reality I was living in, but I was much too beaten down and jaded to do anything about it. I would never let the truth sink in that I was failing myself, letting myself waste away day by day in an endless void of delusion. The delusion that everything was going to work itself out one day, but the truth being that nothing was ever going to change. I avoided the people I loved. I didn't even want anyone to look in my direction half the time. I wanted to be a ghost, to sleep my days away and spend my nights alone. But how did I get to this point? I used to have so many great friends, so many great memories from the times that I was a child. I was so outgoing and fun to be around, so full of life and so optimistic about my future. Now I could barely recognize the person I had become, so calloused and bitter, my only emotions ranging from either rage and frustration to nothing at all. Nothing felt satisfying other than the thought of a quick relief, such as my nightly routine of playing video games for 15 hours a night. But sadly, every night I would relive the fact that those habits were never going to give me long-term happiness. I got to a point where I ran for so long that the one thing that brought me relief for so many years could no longer help me. This moment came to me in April of 2022, when I learned I was being evicted from my home. My one place of safety was being taken from me, and for reasons that were out of my control. It was then I realized the degree of hell my life had become. All that I had ran from for so long was now coming to surface. I was now drowning in a backlog of the things I was too stubborn to deal with in my past years. Once I got to this point, I felt very much angry with my circumstances, almost as if I was surprised that things were going the way they were. For so long, I was going through so much, and it had pushed me to a point that I was no longer a person. I was merely existing as a shell with repetitive behaviors and little to no motivation for change. But when everything got to its worst point, I eventually decided it was time I take charge of my situation and begin to clean up the mess that my life had become. It was like a switch was flicked, and all the negative ways of thinking became irrelevant. I knew that if I was to survive in my own skin, I had to find a purpose in my pain. Now let me ask you, do bad things happen to good people? Well, I think we all know the answer to this. But if there is an ebb and flow in our universe, what could it be that would cause pain to be inflicted upon those undeserving? Not to say that everything can be chalked up to destiny, but what I do believe is that we all have a predetermined path set for ourselves. Life is laid out for us, and it's our job to watch for the signs that it gives, to follow our path as closely as possible in order to become the best version of ourselves. But have you ever found a passion or interest of yours somehow always making its way back to you? For example, let's say your passion was painting. Your entire life you've loved every minute you spent being creative with your brush, but now you've grown far too busy to take part in your painting anymore. You succumb to the daily grind of your 9 to 5 and essentially given up on the idea of your art ever going anywhere. But at times it seems that your mind and even the world around you may point you in the direction of a creative outlet. The signs are pointing that you should make your way back to what means the most to you. But do you choose to acknowledge or ignore them? Well, what if that same instance applies to the difference we make in our world and the people around us? Maybe your creativity is important in this world, much more than you can see for yourself. I believe that everyone has a gift, a talent that they've naturally been given since birth, something that comes easy to them and just makes sense. Whether it's writing, a piece of art, or the sound of the music we make, we as humans are capable of affecting mankind in incredible ways with the gifts we are given. Imagine your favorite song. What is it that makes it your favorite? Is it the way it makes you feel emotionally? The lyrics? Maybe it's just the way that it sounds and the mood it brings upon you with every listen. Now think of how many times a piece of music has moved a group of people, brought an entire venue of strangers closer together when met with the familiar rhythm and harmony of their favorite songs. How many people were empowered by a work of art? Now taking it back to the artists, what may have caused them to write such a magical piece of art? Well, as with anything, there had to be some sort of inspiration. But what if the inspiration was something that wasn't inspiring at all, but rather something traumatic or painful to endure? Does it make the outcome any less beautiful? The song You Learn by Alanis Morissette is a great example of this. This song was written after Miss Morissette was robbed at gunpoint by a man in an empty street one night. The experience became extremely crippling, causing her to suffer from severe panic and anxiety for some time. The only thing that seemed to alleviate her trauma was her writing, and so she channeled something severely negative about her life and was able to turn it into a song that's now loved by millions. Now how about in literature? In the 1995 book, A Child Called It, the author and autobiographer Dave Pelzer recounts a severely abusive childhood. In this book, he describes in detail the overwhelming amount of trauma and abuse that was inflicted upon him from ages 4 to 12. From being locked in a basement with no food, to being intentionally burned or stabbed by his mother, Mr. Pelzer had been put through some of the most heinous acts anyone could dare to imagine. But he never let that define him. In an act of resilience, he wrote a best-selling book and and continues to travel the country to this day, teaching others of the power we have to overcome any obstacle in our path, no matter how harrowing it may seem. Now just think of how many lives he's changed. Would this have been the same outcome if, say, he had grown up in a healthy household? And it's not to say that anyone deserves the trauma that may be inflicted upon them, but there's always a way that we can make better use of the pain we've been dealt. I'm sure you've heard the saying that God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers, right? But whether you believe in a higher power or not, I feel that this saying does hold true, because realistically, as human beings, we all will face severe trial and tribulation in our lives. There's no amount of money, fame, or glory that can keep you from experiencing the inevitable painful moments in life. With mental health problems, disease, and death having no discrimination, there's no shortage of tragedy for those of any social standing. And without getting too political, the state of affairs in almost all countries is scary, to say the least. So just like that, we're all fighting the toughest battles daily, one by one, trying our hardest to survive, to keep going, and for some, it may feel like too much to bear. But you have to remember, there's no feeling quite like redemption. The peaks and valleys in life are what shape and mold us to be the best version of ourselves. In pain, we can find purpose, and with purpose, we have the potential to change our world for the better. Everybody loves an underdog, and at some point in life, we all will fit the bill of one. So grit your teeth and keep pushing. Be the light in a dark world, and choose to learn from the shortcomings that life will hand us at times. There's always a lesson to be learned, and a better day to be seen. So keep going, let your lessons guide you through each chapter, and never lose sight of what makes you special. No one is here by accident. We all live to serve a purpose. So ask yourself, what is your purpose? What is it that keeps coming back to you, no matter how hard you try and run? Whether it's pleasure or pain, it all carries a meaning. It can be the weight at our feet, or the fuel to our fire, the reason we drown, or the reason we swim. So let me ask you, which one will you choose?